Yeah,
Anyway, let
back
me
on our
just
bullshit.
let me see if I can sum this up a little more succinctly. Um, Things that are important to our electoral process because of checks and balances would totally be thrown out the window. Most critically, to me, aside from those other two things that I mentioned, the power to review gerrymandering or voter suppression claims, which is currently granted to state level courts, would only be handled by the federal courts if this were to go through. This is problematic because there are far fewer federal courts than state level.
Yeah.
This would bog down the courts, greatly reduce any given citizen's ability to seek timely relief from infringements on your rights. It's a bad deal. Perhaps most tellingly, when you consider that defense for independent state legislatures comes almost entirely, if not actually entirely, exclusively from the right, it's this idea that that support for this theory would mean that state legislatures would simply decide they could simply decide that they didn't like the outcome of a given election and just refuse to certify it.
Yeah. That's kind of the big elephant, the biggest elephant in the room in this conversation. And again, like this might sound familiar to you. Precursor attempts to legitimize this theory popped up everywhere in the wake of the 2020 election. And that is why, dear listener, we are paying very close attention to what is happening with this particular case before the Supreme Court right now.
That case,
Meow.
right meow, that case, the one that currently before SCOTUS, that many fear may completely destroy democracy as we know it, is Moore v. Harper. The central issue in this case is a question about whether a state's judicial branch may nullify the regulations governing the manner of holding elections for senators and representatives prescribed by the legislature thereof, and then replace them with regulations of the state court's own devising based on vague state constitutional provisions purportedly vesting the state judiciary with power to prescribe whatever rules it deems appropriate to ensure a fair or free election. What does that mean? Let me summarize that because
That was a lot of
it's
words.
a lot easier to read that than it is to listen to it for me. So basically, the question before the court is, does the court, the state court, the Supreme Court of any given state, have the power to take a law that was passed by the legislature of any given state and say, no, this is not applicable, this is unconstitutional, we don't agree with this, and then say, you have to do this thing instead. You cannot run your election this way, you have to run your election this way. And in Moore v. Harper, the Supreme Court of North Carolina said, no, you cannot use this congressional district map. You must use this congressional district map instead.
Yeah. The dispute in Moore v. Harper comes from a very specific challenge to a very specific congressional map that the Republican-controlled legislature was attempting to pass into law in November of 2021. Like, we're already a year past when they were trying to pass this into law, because that's how long it takes to get things through the Supreme Court. And the map was struck down by the North Carolina Supreme Court because they found that it was a partisan gerrymander, and that was in violation of the North Carolina Constitution.